everyone, and welcome to today's Seed World Strategy webinar. My name is Alex Martin, and I serve as editor for Seed World, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to be your host. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about carbon credits, and particularly whether or not carbon credits are worth it for our industry. It's been quite a buzzword as we've branched in, especially to the Biden administration, sustainability and carbon farming. So we're going to dive into this a little bit more on our webinar today. We're going to be live tweeting during today's webinar, so if you'd like to join our conversation, please use the hashtag SWStrategyWebinar to connect with us. We'd also like to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded and it's going to be made available at seedworld.com in the following days. And today we are going to hear from two fantastic speakers. Luis Ribera, professor and extension economist of Texas A&M University, and Rebecca Carlson, agriculture supply lead at Nori. You're going to have some questions for both of these speakers. And we'll be hosting a short live Q&A after they both finish our presentations. So that means if you have a question for either of them, go ahead and type it into the chat box whenever you think of it, and we'll address all of those questions during the Q&A session we'll hold. In today's webinar, I already mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about carbon credits with the goal of answering the question, are they worth it? To answer that, we're going to dive into the background of carbon credits and why they were introduced, as well as what the benefits are. And then we're going to hear whether or not we're seeing tangible benefits that we are supposed to and that we've been hoping we're going to see in the carbon market. And with that, it's time to introduce our first speaker of the day. Dr. Luis A. Ribera is a professor and extension economist in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Texas A&M University. He's the director of the Center for North American Studies and also serves as the program director for international projects with the Agricultural and Food Policy Center. His areas of expertise are international trade, transportation, economic impacts, and risk analysis. He's been invited to be a speaker in over 300 conferences around the world, and he's brought over $30 million in research and extension funding for his programs. So I am excited for him to dive into the history of carbon credits, but I don't want to hog the mic anymore. So Luis, I'll let you go ahead and take it away from here.
Great. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about carbon credits and climate change. There's a lot of things happening lately, and I would like to cover as much as I can, but whatever question that you have, if it's okay to hold it till the end. I'll address any questions, but I would like to start with, a caveat that this is rapidly changing. This is what we know right now, but things are changing very quickly. We have to go back a little bit on the cap and trade and what it was and how it worked. Then I'm going to go on greenhouse gases and agriculture, then the Biden administration and what opportunities that I see there, but also what if I was a producer, and I talk mainly to producers. So if I say producers, that's what I mean, just stakeholders in general. But what I would like to know about this? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is there opportunities? And as usually we talk in the economic world, it depends. So let's just get into it. And as I mentioned, we have done some work on this back in the early 2000s. That was a big issue back then. We have put reports, and you can visit our website at the afpc.tamu.edu for some reports on that. But let's go straight into cap and trade. Well, the concept of cap and trade is basically set a hard cap on emissions, and polluters can buy offsets from someone who could reduce emissions cheaper than they could. So they put a cap on the emissions that they can emit, they can pollute, and then either through technological innovation, they can either reduce their emission or they can buy cheaper offset from other sources. It could be forest owners, farmers, etc. So farmers, we're going to concentrate on that now. This was part of the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009. And at that time, the market was the Chicago Climate Exchange. There's a couple of other reports against the Policy Center. There's another one in the, it's a journal article in American Society of Rural Appraisers or something like that. If you're interested in that article, I can also forward to you. I can send a link to Alex to forward it. You can use my presentation as well. So just again, trying to compromise everything in 15 minutes is going to be a little bit hard, but know that you can have a copy of this presentation as well. And lastly, is because polluter emissions were capped, their costs will increase either by adopting technology to reduce emission or buying the offsets. The issue there, of course, is that those costs they're usually going to be passed down the stream to the consumers. But depending on the technology, depending on the cost of these offsets, it's going to depend on the hike in price. This map is important. It came again, you see at the bottom there, it says the Chicago Climate Exchange, but at that time that was the market. It just tells you by county in the different areas how much carbon can be absorbed when you adopt reduced till or no-till practices on a per year per acre. Okay, is how much carbon is sequestered per year per acre. And let's say in the Midwest, that red zone over there, if you go from conventional tillage to reduce no tillage, it is expected that you can absorb about 0.6 metric tons of carbon per acre per year. Okay, so it's not 1-to-1. And then if you go if we're in Texas, deep South Texas will be 0.2. Then it makes a difference if it's irrigated or not. Some parts of Texas in the Panhandle where it's irrigated, it's 0.6, and then there's different areas. So keep that in mind whenever they say, this is how much you're going to pay on a per ton of carbon. That doesn't mean that it's 1 acre, 1 ton. The most that you can get it will be 0.6 or 60% of 1 ton per acre if you convert. Then let's go into greenhouse gases in agriculture. These are the what they consider greenhouse gases. The main one there, as you can see, over 80% is the CO2, carbon dioxide. But we also have methane, 10%, nitrous oxide, 7%, and then you have that other gases. And I'm going to try to spell it out, but they comprise about 2.8%. Now, even though, and this is important, even though nitrous oxide is only 7%, but it's 300 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat. And this is the issue with the climate change, with more of these gases out there, where we have issues with global warming. So it's important to point out because that's when agriculture plays a major role on in terms of gases, greenhouse gases. Now, when you look at percent of global emission, these are the 4 largest emitters, a little bit over 60%. And number 1 there will be China. Then we have us here in the U.S. with 15%. Then European Union, and then India. Sources of greenhouse gases. The main one there is agricultural soil management at the top, and that includes synthetic nitrogen fertilization, application of manure, or application of managed livestock manure. Again, you're going to have a copy of this, so I'm not going to go one by one, but yes, in terms of the main ones will be agricultural soil management. You got enteric fermentation, which is basically gases that go from both ends of animals, mainly cattle. We have manure management as well. Then we have rice cultivation, which is big one. Urea fertilization. You got liming, and then you got field burning of agricultural residues. And again, you're going to be able to have a copy of this if you want, so you can see more specifically. But just so you have an idea of where the sources that come from agriculture that contribute to these greenhouse gases. You have there's a current situation right now, and this is a study by the EPA that determined that 9.6% of U.S. greenhouse gases come from agriculture. Okay, and out of those agriculture areas where we emit or contribute to these gases, the number one is agricultural soil management, with about 345 million metric tons of CO2. And you see after the CO2, the EQ, which is called equivalent, because they lump sum all these greenhouse gases into CO2 equivalents, which includes the nitrate, dioxide, and another. But they call it CO2 equivalent because CO2 is, like I said, a little bit over 80% of all these greenhouse gases. So when you see that CO2 equivalent, that means that it includes all the other gases as well, greenhouse gases. Now, these are 2019 sources of CO2 emissions. And as you can see, the number one source of emission is the fossil fuel combustion. That is by largely the largest component or emitter of this CO2. And then you see the red arrows there that shows, okay, agriculture, that it will be urea fermentation and liming. Those are the two areas in agriculture that we contribute to these CO2 emissions. Then you have sources of methane emission. And there we have a lot of agricultural activities that contribute to these gases, which is 10.1% of all the greenhouse gases. As you can see in the pie chart at the bottom left there. So then we have enteric fermentation is the number one there. And then you have manure management, then you have rice cultivation, field burn and agricultural residues, and then anaerobic digestion of biogas at biogas facilities. Next, we have the source of nitrous oxide emission, N2O. And as I mentioned, these are the ones that are 300 times more powerful than CO2 to capture heat. So these are big problems. And as you can see again, our number one area of contributing for these gases will be agricultural soil management, which is our largest one. But you also have manure management and you have field burning as well. But again, these are the issue with this N2O is that they're 300 times more powerful of trapping heat. Then you have the other sources on other gases, which contributes about 2.8% of the whole greenhouse gases, but agriculture doesn't have any area that contribute to that. Then you have greenhouse gas sources and sinks. You have the sinks are the ones that you see the bars going to the left, and then the sources will be going to the right, which will be one. The sinks are the ones that help to trap the heat, and the sources are the ones that emit those things. So when you look at forest land remaining forest land, that will be a sink. Then you have remaining settlements, that will be a sink. When you convert land or agricultural land to forest land, that also is a sink. At the bottom, you will see the opposite. You will be land converted to settlements or land converted to cropland. That will be emitters. Now, the Biden administration, what's new with this thing? They're not trying to do the cap and trade again. What they're trying to do is, they're trying to figure out what is it that we know that climate change, or we're refocusing on climate change. This is a problem. So they will focus on a carbon bank and climate smart practices. Okay, but the interesting part of this is that they have major corporations supporting this now. So it's that the larger environmental community has taken the climate change mitigation discussion to a higher level. They're calling it regenerative agriculture. What is that? Nobody really knows. And that's what I tell our producers. We have to come up with exactly does that mean? Does that mean using more cover crop? Does that mean going from conventional to reduced till? What other practices can we use to be in that category to help reduce the emission of these gases? There's been already a House and a Senate hearings on this. On February 25th on the House and March 11th on the Senate. They have the 30 by 30 executive order, which I'm going to explain a little bit more what that means. But then going towards the bottom of this, there's a USDA chief economist issue, and the Policy Center worked directly with the USDA chief economist, and this issue a notice to request for public comments. And the period started on March 16 and went to April 29. They had so many comments that they had to hire a third-party company to help put together those comments and so they can see and read all of them, because they had a lot of comments on that. So we don't know exactly what the extent of those comments, but we know that there's a bunch of them. Now, one thing that is important to point out is that the bottom there, it says U.S. Farm Report on April 10th of this year, which is called talks about the carbon credit reality. It says why conservation-minded farmers may not qualify. And the reason for that is that the companies that are buying carbon credits right now, they don't want to pay for practices that were done before. They wanted to start now, and the change is being now. So if you were already producing no-till and you changed, 5-10 years ago, you probably won't be able to participate in this market for carbon. Now, the 30 by 30 initiative, it's basically protecting 30% of the U.S. by 2030, will require 440 million more acres to be set aside. Just to put things in perspective, you see in 2020, we have 12%, which is 289 million acres already protected for biodiversity. The goal is to add 440 million more to that. And when you look at those square, the reading at the bottom says square shown at same scale at the U.S. So basically, you will need that amount of land by 2030 if the 30 by 30 initiative takes place. So there's a lot of land that should be or need to be taken out of production and put it into biodiversity. And of course, that's going to undermine our capability of producing food. Now, again, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of big multinationals that are supporting this initiative. You got Coca-Cola with the Action on Climate Now. You have Walmart Path to Zero Emission by 2040. You got McDonald's Climate Action, 31% of emission incentive. You got on the top right over the three colors of the red, blue, and green over there. That's the U.S. airlines that they want to reduce CO2 emission by 2050. You have to understand that, the number one emitter is burning of fossil fuel. Well, you need that to fly those planes. So they're going to have to buy those offsets if they want to reach those goals, which, again, producers could benefit from that. But also Amazon is a climate pledge friendly. And then you have a lot of other companies that are supporting this. So the good thing about this is that it's not a mandate by the government. This one is industries are willing to buy offsets because they consider that they're helping the climate with those changes. These are the ag companies that we're aware of with climate programs. You got Bayer, Cargill, Cortego. You see a lot of big companies, Syngenta at the bottom. And right now, most are targeting producers in the Midwest. Let me just give you an example of what they're buying or what they're targeting. And this is Corteva AgriScience is basically targeting producers in Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa, and they provide farmers a way to sell carbon credits. Farmers could earn between $5 to $20 per acre if they use introducing cover crops or they go to reduce tillage. This is one of the ways that these are a couple of the ways that you can get those or sell those carbon credits. The issue right now we're seeing with producers, and here in Texas is the same way, is that 64% of them, they say, I need more information that I can trust before I sign into this. the 15% on the top, you say that they say payment is not worth the effort because you have to keep track of all the things. There's a lot of information that you need to keep track to be able to participate on this. And I'm going to wrap it up with this. What is it that I will want to know before I get into it? And that's what I emphasize with producer. What does it actually mean? Well, the top is there has been discussion in the press that companies buying carbon credits are paying up to $100 per ton. Well, that hasn't been verified, but I've seen it, in the press, and I've talked to producers, and they say, yeah, they heard the same thing about $100 per ton, which sounds really good. However, when you look at the average payment for those actually receiving payment, the average payment for those that actually receiving payments are more or less into the $20 per ton. So all these companies that are buying this credit over there, there's an $80 there that difference, yeah, some of that has to be with keeping track of all the information or the paperwork and all that. But at the same time, there's a big, I'll say profit, but there's a big difference there between what we heard companies are paying and what they're paying the producers. Also important that is to remember that the map of the actual tons per acre can be sequestered in different regions, which is this one here. Remember, it's not 1-to-1. The most that you can get is 60%. Or 0.6 metric ton per year. So that means that if you're actually receiving $20, the producers in the Midwest that decided to go into reduced steel, they're only getting about 12, which is 60% of 20. And the producers in Deep South Texas, they're only going to get $4 per acre. So that's also important to keep in mind. The $20 in the Midwest will likely be less based only on the amount of carbon. That's what I was just talking about with the map here. And based on discussion with farmers who have been in contact with brokers, there's substantial information requirements. Again, for Deep South Texas, for $4, there's no way that I will get into it. If you're getting 12, well, I don't know. But anyways, and most brokers only want to sign up farmers who will begin to do no-till. So the ones that are already been doing it in the past, they're not going to qualify. And there's a number of Texas producers that they've been doing already. This is my last slide here, and this just shows you the percentage of planted acres by main crops. These 4 main crops that are already doing continuous no-till or strip-till that will not be able to participate in this program. But there's some others, of course, that they could. With that, I apologize. I went over 2-3 minutes, but I'll be glad to answer any question that you have. There is my contact information with my email and my phone number. With that, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Luis. That was so interesting to hear a little bit more about the economic side behind carbon markets and carbon credits. And I think that will lead us to have a lot of good questions. So everyone, if you have a question on your mind for Luis right now, go ahead and type it into our chat box. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our second speaker for the day, who is Rebecca Carlson. Rebecca Carlson is the agriculture supply lead at Nori. As a trained researcher and agronomist, she blends her experiences to help shape the Nori process and product to most effectively meet the scientific rigor and the farmers' needs of enrollment in their carbon market. Previously, while scouting fields in Nebraska, she also worked on her extended family's farm and cow-calf operation, where she chased and was chased by plenty of Black Angus cattle. She earned her BS in biochemistry from Biola University and her MS in agronomy and agroecology from the University of Minnesota. And she's going to dive into a little bit more of those benefits of carbon credits. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us. I'm going to let you go ahead and take it from here.
Great. Well, thank you, Alex, for having me. And thank you for everybody for being a part of this conversation. Also, thanks, Luis. I learned a lot from the history from you and the economics behind it, because at the end of the day, if the economics aren't there, then people aren't going to adopt it. So it's great hearing the history and the rationale behind. But I am going to jump into Nori. So who is Nori and what is our pilot all about? Nori is actually a startup. We were founded in 2017, and our whole goal is to build a carbon marketplace to play a role in reversing climate change. We are not an ag company, though sometimes I think we are. We want to be carbon agnostic and build out carbon credits, not just for regenerative agriculture, but also for, blue carbon and direct air capture and whatnot. But there are plenty of things to figure out before we venture into the next. So why are carbon credits important? Well, if you see here in this graph, this is a modeling of what our baseline emissions will be if we continue on our current trends. So right now, globally, we're emitting about over 300 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas equivalents. If we continue on that trend, right, we can see it just growing and growing. This problem is really comparable actually to in the late 1800s. The big, grand challenge of the time was there was about 2 billion people. And the question was we don't have enough capacity to feed the people. We can't continue on this rate and continue feeding the world. And with a lot of innovation, not only with synthetic nitrogen, with amazing plant breeding, and other revolutions in agriculture, we really were able to actually turn it and actually increase the carrying capacity of our soils to actually help our world. So now we're in this second base challenge. Before was how do we feed people? And it's how do we actually save the planet? And so I believe at this time, we don't have to follow this trajectory and we can make changes. There's a lot of different ways to do offsets, right? There's avoidance offsets. So this first one, avoiding, is just a kind of baselining at 30 million. Reduction is we reduce that line, but we really need a portion of carbon removal offsets to really dip below that line and actually get down to previous levels before. So we're going back to more normal weather patterns, and actually removing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Our CEO always says, he's carbon dioxide isn't bad as it stands. It's just simply in the wrong place. So how do we get it back to a level of 300 parts per million, and kind of restore the earth? So removing carbon is actually such a significant role in that. There's just like how we had a lot of revolutions to feed the world, we need a lot of different players in the game to help, get these levels back. So how do we start removing more? But our first stop is regenerative agriculture. And Lisa made a good point. It's what does that mean? It's such a soft word. And the way we define it are just ways that go to feeding your land, having your land feed itself, right? Through regenerative agriculture, reducing tillage, adding more photosynthesis, just restoring those natural biomes that we previously had. So in our first methodology as Nori, as we're building soil carbon in agriculture, we're starting with U.S. croplands, and we're increasing the soil organic carbon through these regenerative practices. And we need to come up with a way. There's a billion things to figure out along the process, and my brain is simply always spinning, but it's exciting. But our first way of measuring the carbon is through a process-based model, which is soil metrics. And soil metrics is basically the commercial side of the USDA greenhouse gas tool Comet Farm. But since we're using it in the private market, they use their commercial side. So these are process-based modelings that take agronomic information into account, soils, weather, to understand the fluctuation in carbon over the course of time, and helps us build out trends and reduces the need for basically creating experiments out of everybody's farms to get appropriate soil sampling. So who qualifies? In the Nori process, our qualifications are that they've adopted regenerative practices since 2010. And back to what Lisa was saying before, there's a lot of farmers who have started these practices and pioneered them. And how do we kind of reach in the middle and show something that works? I think the best way to reach farmers is not through great marketing, all these graphs, it's just by showing things that work. And so we really want to support those who have by allowing a look back period of if you've adopted, reduce your tillage, adopted cover crops, increase the growing season, or increase the biodiversity of your operations. Those are all boxes you can check to qualify for our program. As Lisa's also saying, quality farm management records are a bear to get sometimes. So we need that to enroll farmers, boundary files, based in the United States. The land hasn't been in conservation reserve program or any of, basically hasn't been in prairie since 2000, because that land use changes, again, through Lisa's graph, is actually an emitter if we're going out of prairie. and a willingness to pay for verification costs. So how do we do it? The first step is the data collection, which is where a lot of our headaches with our producers come of getting the most appropriate information in a way that matches how they store their information and in a way that they can continue storing it. We have a few tools to help with historic farm management, whether that's with, satellite imagery to look back of what the crop rotations were, best management practices, like, yes, you applied 200 pounds of N of corn to corn each year. Then getting those present records to show that a regenerative practice has taken place in the past 10 years. And then hypothetical future operations to show the trend line of if you continue on with these processes, how much carbon are you going to actually sequester? And we use all this data, loads and loads of it, to build out how we measure this incremental ton of carbon dioxide removed. So in this graph, the green bars are our old practices because farmers are stewards of the land. They're planting, they're sequestering carbon. There's always going to be a certain amount of carbon sequestered with these practices. But then say you change practices and adopt something new, you're sequestering more carbon than you did before. And continuing out those trends using these process-based modelings, we can really understand this fluctuation and dynamic change. And what our NRTs, which I shall introduce, are Nori removal tons, which are our carbon credits. So one NRT represents 1 ton of carbon removed and retained in the soil for a minimum of 10 years. So if I bring that up, that's the definition. And the way we issue these NRTs is the difference between the green and the gold bar moving forward. So we're having an incremental difference to actually show we're reducing carbon because the previous practices are already accounted for in our greenhouse gas accounting. So then once we have the numbers and we issue like a look back period of, say, all those gold bars add up to 10,000 NRTs, and we are like, great, this is what your project is worth as it stands today. We definitely need to verify those practices. The worth of carbon comes from A, that it's verified that it happened, B, how long it's in the ground for, and C, that it was quantified in a robust way. So our verifiers come in and they're approved verifiers with agronomic experience. A lot of them are ANSI certified, currently working with 3 verifiers. And they basically take an account and build the story, right, that this actually took place on our land. This is the only step in the Nori process that's actually paid for by the supplier. We don't have any fees for the farmer because we're very much farmer forward and want the most of all of the cash that they set their price for to go back into their pocket because they're the ones that are making the change. And it is a hurdle, like operationally, to adopt new practices. So that's the only part that's paid for by the farmer. And then we do have a contract of a 10-year commitment because, again, the value of carbon comes with time. We can't get buyers if you're like, yeah, it'll be in the ground this year, but next year it might get tilled up. So they're not going to pay a premium for just a short permanence. We allow the farmer to set their own price. They have to commit to selling at least 15% of the NRTs on our marketplace. And just like this assurance that carbon remains in the ground. This isn't necessarily that we have to keep up the same practices or we're mandating practices. We have force majeure clauses because weather will always play the biggest role. But again, this commitment that they're doing their best to maintain the carbon ground. Then we issue NRTs and we sell our NRTs in a first in, first out market. But what it comes down to, what we've done, right? Because there's so much talk and there's a lot of players in the game right now with carbon markets. And it's actually really exciting. I think the more players that have different contracts that meet different needs of all the vast amount of producers, right? I'm sure the audience here today and with the seed production, there's so many different ways of sequestering carbon through the seeds that are planted. So I think, again, the more carbon markets that can fit the more farmers, I think that's lovely. But what we've done as Nori, we've actually paid 2 farmers. And again, it's been a process. We've learned so much from their experience. We really want to make sure that we're building a program that meets those that we're serving. And the overall, once the farmers are paid, it's a positive experience. In the meantime, as we have people in the queue and it's like, okay, it is a new field and therefore it will come with a lot of questions to make sure we're appropriately meeting all the needs of a carbon marketplace and learning from what went wrong before. And through it all, we're just helping to simplify the process without losing the scientific rigor that makes the credits worthwhile. And we're learning, like this is the pilot phase. We started this I think our first sale was in 2019. And it's the Wild West. A lot of people are like, I should get this much. I should do this. What about this? What are you doing with my data? A lot of expectations, and we really want to be clear about where we stand on each step. But it takes a lot to meet the expectations and appropriately address them. We really value the input of who we're building this marketplace for, whether that is the farmer or the buyer, those who are playing a role in this game, like the seed producers. I'll get back in a moment. And it is complicated. Farm data is valuable. It's not always easy to access, and building out these using process-based models takes a lot, but we are starting with fairly simple tools. There's questions about soil sampling, and is that the right way to go, and having it ground truthed. There's a lot of uncertainty with that really requires a robust experimentation and experimental design. And how do we hold the farmers accountable to that? So I think there's so much room for innovation. And like, is it worth it, right? We're starting something we collectively, like as a society, are really building out to try to get everybody kind of playing a role in reversing climate change. And so are carbon credits worth it? Yes, I believe they are. I believe they play an important role. I think with time, though, as we are, pioneering, asking the questions, really, it's young. So like the science is young. Soil science and carbon fluctuations throughout the carbon profile is interesting. The different types of seeds and plants that we're growing, and their photosynthesis, ability to actually sequester the carbon that then goes in the soil is we need to understand more and more. And where do we go from here? I think one of the most important things, especially for this audience, is if we're using process-based modeling, as we're using process-based modeling, is really understanding, again, how the dynamics of these incredible like seed mixtures or different, like miscanthus, all these different types of things that farmers are going to start growing to kind of really diversify the U.S. agricultural scene. Can we model those appropriately in a way that we can then incorporate it into the tools we're using? As it's young and new, the tools are like a hoe. Like we don't have a John Deere tractor with precision planting that can really hone in on every single portion, but we can start somewhere and refine from there. So that refining process is where we all come to the table, and it's just exciting to hear what's being done and what can happen from there. So with that, thank you for your time. If you have questions, obviously we have the question and answer portion, but you can always email hello@nori.com to help clarify anything I just spoke about. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think you're right. I have heard it described fairly often that carbon credits and just carbon farming in general kind of is like the Wild West right now. So I'm excited to dive into some of these questions. So everyone, we've already had some questions come in, but if you haven't had the chance to type in your question to Louis or Rebecca, go ahead and type those in the chat box now. I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the earlier questions we've got, but we'll make sure we try to get to everything before we wrap up. So Louis, our first question is to you. You brought up this data, this report from the Sinks report for CO2 emissions. This question wanted to ask, who created all of the measurements for that report? And is it possible to access the analysis of that report? I think they were just interested in seeing a little bit more of the data too.
I believe so, but that happened back in the early 2000s, and it was supported by the Chicago Climate Change. I've seen data on historical data on carbon readings through several experiments that we run here in Texas. But to answer your question specifically, I don't know who did it. But it was fairly well, taken or used, as that was the way to simplify the amount of carbon that could be sequestered by region, by practice, and things like that. But I will have to dig a little bit more into where exactly that came. But I know that I don't think the Chicago Climate Exchange website is up anymore, but they had all the links on data and where to get it and all that. But since that one ended, I believe it ended in 2010 or 2012, and I'm not sure if they still have the website or not.
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Louis. A second question, and I'll pose this to both you, Louis, and Rebecca, because I think this came in at the end of your section, Louis. But we talked a lot about different crops that could be eligible to participate, and different crops that probably wouldn't be eligible to participate. So this question asks whether or not if you could do a conversion to perennial crops such as grass and pasture seed crops, and will they be able to participate in some of these carbon programs?
For what I remember, and I'm sorry, Rebecca, if I jumped in, but I'll start and you can correct me if I say something different, but or wrong. But at that time, yes, there were a whole list of different activities that you can do. The most popular one, because it's a more practical one, was trying to go from conventional to reduced till. But then you have also different rates if you go from cropland to perennials, from cropland to forest, from and things like that. So it used to be that data used to be at the Chicago Climate Exchange website. But yes, the rates will change depending on the activities. And when I said activities, it will be the type of crops and what you're going to be doing with them.
Yes, I agree with what you said, Luis, of the idea that we can actually stack these regenerative practices on top of each other to go from 0.6 to 0.7 to 0.8 if you're adding all of these different practices in. But to perennial plants, yes, I mean, perennials are incredible at sequestering carbon. And so we do, as Nori, use it as one of the practices that qualifies. One of the things I was speaking about before, though, is the ability to model what these diverse species actually are pulling out of the ground or pulling out of the air. We have the simple models, but there is refining and tweaking to get these multi-species varieties.
That's perfect. That is perfect. Thank you both. Rebecca, I think this next question actually goes to you. And it's lovely. It goes back to the seed. Would a more efficient seed, for example, something that uses less nitrogen for the same or more yield, count as a new management practice to create a carbon credit?
Probably yes, but as we stand, not yet. It goes back to the tools we use. We don't have the research to model that appropriately over time. This comes back to if we incorporate soil sampling, we could actually capture that difference of incremental carbon drawdown from these plants. But we're really bound by the modules we have, and we don't necessarily have a module that captures efficiency in plants' use of nitrogen. But stay tuned, or do the research and feed it in.
No, that's perfect. I have often heard as well that sometimes it takes a little bit for science to catch up to things like this. Louis, for you, this is a little bit of a different question. We talked about so many different things that are contributing to carbon emissions. And this person wants to know, how does ocean algae fit into the equation, if at all? Is ocean algae causing any extra carbon emissions? Is it really negligible, or how do they fit in?
I'm not sure. I remember that I was also working on bioenergy, renewable energy, and one of the feedstock was looking into algae, and at A&M we did quite a bit of analysis on that. I remember that they were actually positive, like a sink for CO2. I just can't remember the rate, so I don't remember. But what I remember is that yes, it could be a sink for CO2. I just can't remember how big of a sink it would be.
No, that's okay.
I can jump in too, because as Nori, an agnostic carbon market where we want all types of carbon to be able to generate credits and sell in our marketplace, Some of my colleagues have done pretty extensive work in the area, and it is a carbon sink. It is a potential for blue carbon to become a carbon credit. But as we were speaking about earlier, the methodologies behind it are really complex. Or like working in the ocean, how do you efficiently quantify, capture, know any leakage that's happening? It's really complex, and there's a lot of great work being done. So yes, it is a huge potential. Just how, again, do we quantify it?
Mm-hmm. No, that is perfect. Thank you both. Sorry, Louis, that we asked you something that, of course, you wouldn't just have that stat on the top of your brain. That is a hard pull when it's not something you specifically work with every day. I think this next question will be fun for both of you, quite frankly. It's one of our ones we just got in, and it asks, with the potential for a change in the political climate every 4 years, and with that, the potential to impact incentives and prices, does a producer have the ability to lock in pricing for carbon sequestering for extended periods of time, say, for example, 10 years?
I'll take a quick stab, and I think Luis can go into the economics of it. But Nori is a voluntary marketplace, so we don't want to ride the waves of administration. We want a private marketplace to come. People choose to sell and people choose to buy, and therefore true price discovery of the carbon isn't necessarily tied to, again, every 4 years. With that, our contract allows the farmer to set their own price. And so if you're never willing to sell below $15, like, you don't have to. But if you want to choose and you see that we have true price discovery behind it, that it's actually worth $30 and you set your contract at 15, you can actually up your contract to best capture that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add that the good thing about this new system, I guess, as opposed to the cap and trade was by law. You put a cap and you're going to be able to either, reduce your emissions through technology or buy offsets. Well, this one is just companies, multinationals are willing to buy offsets because they want to reduce their carbon footprint. So that is the market working. Now, different political, winds can change things, yes, but still the market is the one that is setting the price, it's not the government. So as long as these multinationals are willing to participate in the market or still have, like to contribute to climate change issues, then you're going to have a market. So I hope that helps answer the question.
No, I think that's perfect. Quite honestly, you both mentioned it. It's the Wild West. I think anything will help in terms of answering these questions. Another question, and I apologize in advance. I'm not sure who to direct this one to. Another question asks, how far away are we from being able to benchmark and measure carbon sequestration with satellite imagery? I'm thinking, I guess, for example, like drone imagery and things like that. A
bit a ways away at this point. In order to get the carbon, the depth of the soil profile we need to appropriately estimate carbon. I mean, there's so much to account for satellite imagery, like the moisture of the soil, the moisture of the plants, the density of plants above it. How do you have the right, spectra to actually reduce that noise to get appropriate soil samples? Though I think a really great place for it to start is in the verification and the data collection that it takes to build this out. And then we can run models and do this, calibrate, validate portion in time where we still have a use for the satellite imagery, but it's not necessarily our full carbon quantification tool.
I agree as well. And again, it's remember as a market that is starting, hopefully there's enough buy-in so new technologies come on board. Mm-hmm. If it's a win-win, producers as well as buyers are winning on this, then you're going to have an incentive for new technologies to be developed.
Perfect. Thank you both. What about the penalty that current crops like soybean have in terms of carbon intensity because of the indirect land use change? if we do identify preserved program and certified deforestation free, can we capture the value of the whole offset without the penalty?
I'm not sure I understood. What could you repeat it?
Yeah, sorry. It's a bit of a longer question, and I might have stumbled over some words there, so I apologize to both of you. It sounds like they are wondering about penalties that crops maybe like soybeans, and what were some of the other crops that you mentioned, Lewis, cotton and corn and things like that have in terms of carbon intensity, and maybe how can we capture the whole value of the offset without having any penalty restrictions on them?
Well, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I remember during the Chicago Climate Exchange, there was, you couldn't have, I think you had to have a rotation. You couldn't have a continuous soybean production and claim the amount of carbon per acre that you can do. So you had to do it. It was every other year or every 2 years you do soybean, and then you have to do something else. I don't know if that's the penalty, but I remember that you couldn't have continuous soybean production.
I don't have too much to add beyond that. And with like the incremental change of understanding what was to what is, we can kind of like the life cycle analysis is kind of captured in that denominator behind it.
No, that's perfect. Thank you both. And thank you for answering a slightly difficult question. Now, this one's a little bit of a hypothetical question. I think this one would be mostly directed to Rebecca here, if you're willing to take a stab at it. Of course, every operation is going to be different, but in your opinion, what is the most efficient plant system to, I guess, efficiently do carbon sequestration?
Ooh, I'm going to pull a politician and say it depends.
That's what I was thinking the answer would be, actually.
Yeah, there's so many factors that go into place of, again, like what your soil type is, what is good for your operation. Like not everybody can just go to pasture in order to like stay economically viable for their business. So depends on what your definition of like most efficient is in terms of like the full picture of a farming operation. From like carbon sequestration, the more perennials, the higher density of the plants that are growing, and the longer they're on the ground, the better.
That's perfect. Lewis, do you have anything else you want to add on to that?
No, I think I'll pass. I think Rebecca did an excellent job there.
Oh, perfect. Then I think we have time for just about one more question, guys. So this question is actually me. I'm going to steal the spotlight from everyone else in the audience. What is the biggest question you both get when it comes to carbon credits?
Oh, I get so many. The biggest question. Luis, do you want to take a first stab?
Sure. For me, it's like, what is that? Is there money in there? Yeah. What happened if we get another somebody from a different political party and seat? Is this going to continue? Things like that. The thing is that with carbon is that you're buying something that you cannot see. So we just have to explain what it means and go from from what we've learned from the past and what is it that we're seeing right now. But again, you all mentioned it's a wild west there. It's a market that is being developed. There's a lot of things that we're gonna learn. There's a lot of things that we're gonna improve. But just to have the basics there. Because it's something that you're basically buying air, but again, you're helping the environment. So that's you have to keep that in mind as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of my biggest questions is actually the question of this webinar: like, is it worth it? Like, why should I do it now? And what we balance is like, it is takes a pioneering spirit to kind of enter at this point. So if people want to wait and see how things change, I think that's great. But since we're at the beginning, there's a lot to be gained in enrolling now, and being one of the first adopters of carbon marketplaces, being able to help shape the experience and just being on the forefront has benefits that won't be here for the long haul. So explaining, is it worth it, is a huge question I get.
No, that's perfect. I think both of those are excellent questions. And hopefully by answering them, hopefully we've given everyone something of value to take home and to tell their families that they learned about carbon credits and carbon farming. So that is the last question we have time for today, folks. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'd like to give a big thank you one last time to Louis and Rebecca for joining us today and for taking some time out of their day to talk to us. And thank you to you all who sent in questions and who participated. Again, we hope you found something of value that you can take back to your dinner table later tonight. Just a small reminder before we sign off, if you missed anything during this webinar, we will have a recording made available later in the next couple of days at seedworld.com. So you can go back and look at the presentation whenever you'd like, and make sure if you need to, you can also reach out to Rebecca and Louis if you have any questions. And thank you all so much again. We hope you have a wonderful day. This is Alex Martin of Seed World signing off. Bye-bye, everyone.